All of our assemblies are looking good. The next step will be to fill the cartridges with oil and assemble them. But before we do that, let's let these components sit for at least 2 to 3 hours so we can allow the Loctite to fully cure on the assemblies before we submerge them in oil. Now, a few hours later, the Loctite has cured on our parts and the cartridges are ready to be filled with oil. With your DIY kit, you will receive a JBI suspension settings guide. On that settings guide, it will provide you with the exact amount of oil to put inside of your cartridge. So the way that'll look is you're gonna take the oil, pour in the volume that is stated on your settings guide into your cartridge. Once you have done that, you're gonna wanna pump the rod up 4 to 5 inches, stop, pause for a moment, that'll let some air bubbles go up, and then slowly pull it back down. I'll even spin the cartridge rod as I pull up and down on it to help just get out any trapped bubbles in the mid valve. Now, to get a good bleed, you should at least do this for 10 minutes. Here at JBI, we have fixtures just for holding cartridges. So we'll put some cartridges in here, put oil in them, and just bleed them over a course of a couple hours because they're not taking up any of our other good vices that we utilize for actually assembling suspension. This cartridge has already been bled for a while, so it is ready to be assembled with the compression assembly being installed in the top. To do that, we're going to push our damper rod all the way up until it stops. Now we can take our compression assembly and slide it in from the top, and this is going to push our damper rod out at the same time. Perfect. So we have some light resistance against it, and now we're going to thread in the cap. Again, do not clamp your cartridge very tight. It is thin-walled aluminum. To do this first part, you do not have to clamp it much, but when we go to torque it at the end, we're going to put the fork cap wrench back on it. Put the fork cap wrench on, and now we can torque it. Now we can check our work. Let's unmount the fork cartridge, and we're going to compress it down all the way until it stops against the lock nut, and we'll even get a little bit of oil venting from our holes. So that way it's going to purge itself to the correct amount of volume that should be inside of it. I'll cover the holes a little bit with my hand so we don't get sprayed in the face. Just a very, very small amount came out. You can hear the bubbles just perfect. Once I get to the bottom, I'll hold it there for a bit. That's letting all the small bubbles escape, and the free piston is going downwards and creating a seal. So that way we just have oil inside of this cartridge. Lift up, and we have a full extension on it. So we have a very good bleed on this cartridge. Some very cool componentry inside, the JBI volume spacer. Now we're ready to install it inside the fork tubes. Next step is installing the spring seat back onto the fork cartridge. On the top one, we can see the order that they go back on. Pay very special attention to the top silver piece, as that is our circlip collar, and that covers our circlip. When we slide it up, it goes over. As you can see, it has a counter bore on one side and it is flat on the other. So the counter bore is what is going to slide up and over the circlip. And that is what holds this in place with the most strength. If this gets installed backwards, you're going to blow the circlip off of the cartridge tube. So it goes that piece, our thrust washer, and then our spring perch. Excellent. The springs are still inside of the outer tube assemblies. So these cartridges are ready to be installed back into the outer tubes and to be reconnected with our rebound adjusters. Before we do that, we need to install our rebound adjuster rods. Fork has been remounted in the parallel vise, so that way we can reinstall the H-tool. The reason for partially threading the outer tube to the cartridge was to hold the cartridge centered as we push down on it and get the cartridge rod out to install the H-tool. Now again, with the parallel vise, you want to get in there real tight. You're going to push with this hand and install it behind the lock nut. I find it massively easier to do it on the ground. We can push down. Just make sure that you have a soft surface to do that on. Here we have the fork assembly upside down, and I find it much easier to push down on it to get the cartridge rod out and to put in the H-tool than trying to do it on the vise. So we have a specific fixture that we made for doing that. If you're doing it at home, use some rags or just find a soft surface to put the end of the fork on for doing this. So you can just kind of use both hands, push down and slide it in. Excellent. Next, we're going to install the rebound adjuster rod. It has a D shape to it, like the letter D. So you're going to drop this in the top, and it's going to most of the time stop and protrude out still. So what we need to do is find the center for this. And you do that by spinning it, and then it'll drop into place. That's how we know that the D-rod found its center inside of the damper rod. Now that the rebound adjuster rod has been installed, it is time to reinstall the rebound clicker. So what we want to do is line up the D shape of the clicker with the rod that is on the inside. Now before we do that, you may notice that I put some synthetic grease on the inside of our adjuster where the rod is going to thread, and I put some grease on the outside of the threads where it's going to thread into the fork lug. This will just make it easier for taking this fork apart for future maintenance. So again, we're going to line up our adjuster with the shape of the adjuster rod. Perfect. And we're going to start the first few clicks by hand. I like to use a rag because oftentimes these have sharp edges. Perfect. Now we're going to get a 17mm wrench, and that is going to go onto our lock nut. And we're going to continue threading until it stops. Once these have come to a kind of hand-tight spot, we're going to tighten it up a little bit more. You can look up the specific torque on this. I think the torque value is always way too freaking high. You're dealing with aluminum threads on an aluminum rod. That's hollow. The threads always have grease or oil on them, so that drops the torque spec a lot as well. So I say just use your best judgment. Don't get crazy on it. I like to begin threading this in with the socket while it's upside down. And now we're going to mount it into the parallel vise so we can do our final torque on this rebound adjuster. All right, so it's slightly seated here. I'm going to maybe move the ratchet about 1/8 of a turn. And that has been torqued down. So the fork has been remounted in the fixture. We're now going to unthread the fork cap from the outer tube so we can pour in the specified amount of oil per your JBI suspension settings guide that is provided with your DIY kit. Take your time pouring in the oil. Also, make sure you get all of it in outside of your measuring cylinder. Sometimes a lot of residual likes to stay in there, so take your time to verify you get the exact amount of volume of oil that's referenced on your settings guide from us. Perfect. Now it is time to do our final tightening on the fork cap. Cool, it just went snug, and we're gonna snug that up a little more. Now, if you haven't already done so, set your compression and rebound clickers per the JBI suspension settings guide, mount this to your bike, and you are ready to shred.